hear from people who survived the hurricane and then had to deal with the official neglect and abuse in its aftermath. They will be joined by people with expertise on environmental and flood control issues related to Katrina, and by filmmakers, investigative journalists, and others who have relevant testimony to give on this question.
We feel that we will learn that this behavior, which is visited on our folks during this disaster, is not just behavior which has just were incident upon this event, but it's behavior which is related to the endemic behavior which the Bush administration has had toward the human rights of people throughout the world.
Now, there's a lot of talk about ineptness when people think of and discuss Bush and company. They talk about how they bungled the situation after Katrina, how their corruption and cronyism caused people to suffer needlessly. Well, let's get down to some cold, naked truth. These people aren't just inept bunglers, they're criminals. They're not just negligently criminal. They're also criminal in that they consciously took actions and carried out policies that caused many people to die and to suffer needlessly. This neglect and abuse fell and continues to fall most heavily on black people in the Gulf Coast region, and this also was not the result of some accident, but also of deliberate government policy. You'll hear testimony that bears on that today. I believe this adds up to a picture of not just crimes, but crimes against humanity.
Often what we hear people saying that Katrina did this and Katrina killed this many people, Katrina hurt and destroyed all sorts of property. What we all need to do, and I've done it myself, is we have to substitute the word Katrina by saying the levees. The levees caused death. The levees resulted in the destruction of property. And then we have to go a little further. We have to say the Army Corps of Engineers caused these deaths, and the Army Corps of Engineers destroyed this property. And then we have to go further than that and say the Bush administration caused these deaths, and the Bush administration caused the destruction of this property, and stop blaming it on a hurricane which had nothing to do with what we have in front of us.
The problem of the levees is not one, in terms of levee repair and strengthening, is not one of technology. The one is the one of will and how monies get allocated and spent.
It is well known that New Orleans has been on FEMA's top 3 list of disaster sites, and publications ranging from Scientific American to the local newspaper have run major articles on the coming disaster. But in 2004, the Corps of Engineers requested funds for additional levee protection and for flood control, and the Bush administration cut the amount requested by 80%.
Cutbacks were at the point that the Corps Office had to implement a hiring freeze, and at that point, the budget that was slated was $10 million instead of the $37 million that were required for this project.
Okay, so for a 5-year period, there was essentially nothing that was done.
There was money that was allocated that was insufficient to move the project forward.
Okay, thank you.
All of this clearly shows that the government, the Bush administration, FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers were aware of what their responsibilities were aware of what the needs were in terms of levees, in terms of construction, in terms of shoring them up, what the requirements were in terms of the finances being allocated and being spent, and clearly ignored every one of those in the face of their own report talking about thousands of bodies and coffins floating in the streets. And I think we don't need to say any more than that they clearly breached that duty.
Uh, 120,000 people that had no means of evacuating. The annual income of this 120,000 is roughly around $6,000 to $8,000 a year. Prior to Katrina hit, Many attempts have been made ever since last year when the Cuban government was able to evacuate 1.5 million people out of harm's way of a Category 5 that was made a direct hit at Havana. Many of us tried to meet with city administration about establishing such as a similar plan. No one wanted to hear it. What we was told is that the city had a plan. And if they had a plan, I never saw it carried out unless their plan was just to abandon those that couldn't get out of harm's way. Superdome was only open when it was 12 hours left before the hurricane was supposed to hit. And then they made people stand out in the rain for some up to 5 hours waiting to get in, because they searched every man, woman, and child and all their possessions for weapons before they was allowed into the Superdome. Reason why I'm saying this, because later it was reported that they had groups of armed thugs running through the Superdome, raping women and killing babies.
Having this information and not acting on that after these scenarios were run, in my estimation, that is criminal negligence.
Orleans Parish Prison was flooded in Katrina, and if you look in the Human Rights Watch, they've written up a large report on maybe the 1,000 people that may have died there. On the day of the 28th and the 29th, the guards and administrators of Orleans Parish Prison fled and left. As I said, somewhere around 1,000 people, including staff, medics, doctors, and prisoners in the jail.
The prosecution would like to call its first witness, Mr. Larry McBride.
Like people with capital offense, they couldn't release them. But most of the people with like misdemeanor charges, they're supposed to cut them people loose off top, because there wasn't no threat to society. And this never happened, you know. When
they were without food and water, and so for how long?
I see it for about 3 or 4 days, you know.
Both food and water?
Both. They left us to die in there. They took their family out of the prison, and they know that the prison was flooding up with water. Once it got up to where it reached me to my waist, a couple of us broke the racks off the bed and broke the windows so we could get out and go up to higher grounds. When we ran to them guards, they went to beating us, saying that we was trying to escape. We started telling them, man, we're not trying to escape. We're trying to get to higher ground.
What happened to the poor in the Gulf Coast cannot be tolerated or ever allowed to happen again. This administration and all those who were complicit in this tragedy must be held accountable for their actions.
We asked them, look, man, give us some water, give us something to eat. No, that's what their words. They didn't say that we were going to try to get y'all something. They said no.
We went to the fire station, and we asked the firemen, do they have any water that they can give us to drink? And the firemen told me and my sister that they didn't have any water to give us. They only had enough for themselves. And so me and my sister, we walked away devastating. I kept passing out because of exhaustion.
They stood up in the house for 8 days. Every time an Army helicopter passed over, they'll tell them, we'll be back, somebody will be back there for you. How long it take for somebody to come get you? 8 days?
Were the authorities in the area, did they have trucks and helicopters? Did you see any of them, and did any of them offer you any rescue or emergency supplies?
No. What me and my sister did, she ran to one end of the hall, out in the opening, I ran to the other end, and we had a rag in our hand just waving for the helicopters to just rescue us. But they did not rescue us. Even the Army trucks, so many Army trucks, just was driving past us. We even waited for the Army trucks to help us because we were so desperate, we was dehydrated. They did not give us no assistance. Even the police, we even asked the police for water, or where can we get gas that we can try to get out of the city. The police just looked at us as though we was nobody. They looked at us as though we was just nothing. And I hear story about many was going in stores, and they said they was looters, but to be honest, they was going in stores to survive. Absolutely. It was people helping people. It was not the army, it was not the police, it was not the ones that was in authority to help us, but it was just a community helping each other to survive.
I gotta tell you, I thought I seen it all. I've never seen anything in my life like this.
No food, no water, I mean the bare necessities.
And you would never imagine what you saw in the convention center in New Orleans. I just don't know how to tell you how bad it is and how they need help yesterday.
You got a 3-week-old infant out here. How is a 3-week-old infant gonna be able to survive out here with no milk, no water?
These are the families who listened to the authorities, who followed direction, who believed in the government. They were told to go to the convention center. They did. These are law-abiding citizens who have been left behind. They did everything they were told. They are just left behind. There's nothing offered to them. No water, no ice, no sea rashes, nothing. For the last 4 days, it's getting very, very crazy in there and very dangerous. I don't want to sound negative against anybody or any official, but according to them, they're there on their own. There's no police, there's no authority. They've been behaving. They have not started any melees, any riots, nothing. They just want food and support. There's no hostility there, so they don't need to be bringing any guns or anything like that. They need support.
Tell them that we need to get out of here.
People are dying. They're dying. Babies is dying.
There's no support here. There's no foundation. There's no plan B, plan A. These people are very desperate. I saw 2 gentlemen die in front of me because of dehydration. The sanitation was unbelievable. The stench in there, it was unbelievable. Dead people around the walls of the convention center, laying in the middle of the street in their dying chairs where they died, right there in their lawn chair. They were just covered up, in their wheelchair, covered up, laying there for dead. Babies, 2 babies, dehydrated and died. I just tell you, I couldn't take it.
As you saw there, that was the best clean video that the network could possibly show. What I videotaped was so unreal.
Do you know where the FEMA camp was located?
It was like about 3 blocks from the house, but it was more or less like for workers, for contractors, Red Cross, for people who was coming in just to work. It wasn't for the residents of New Orleans.
And they said this is only for FEMA, for Red Cross, and for those various elected or officials that were there, police and what have you. So we were not fed.
They got trucks of water just sitting there. And they had this pregnant lady came up there. She asked the man, give her some water. And the man, one of the guards, National Guard, told her no. She wouldn't get no water.
It was more of a security presence than it was, let's help these residents.
When the decision was made to cut off the aid, what was the rationale for that?
That there was no longer an emergency.
On day 3, we asked for medical help, and doctors from Atlanta with medical supplies was searched and then turned around. When they turned around, those black doctors, they was denying us the basics of survival.
Neither FEMA or the American Red Cross delivered health care to the New Orleans area. The Red Cross could only treat superficial wounds, talking about cuts, scrapes, twisted ankles. They always say we have liability issues.
There was 94 people that volunteered to drive the school buses down to New Orleans. There was one woman, a bus driver, who her husband works for a bottled water company. He talked to his boss, and they donated like thousands of bottles of water for us to take. So we drove all night, took about 6.5 or 7 hours to New Orleans, and only to be stopped by the National Guard at a certain point right by the I-10 overpass. They had these concrete barricades or something like that set up, so you only could go a certain point, and they come out at these bus drivers with their rifles in their hands. So then, to placate us, they took like 40 buses at a time and moved us forward about another, through, I think we went through Jefferson Parish. We were up on the freeway overpass where we could see the convention center, which is where we were supposed to go pick up people. And people are cheering at us, and we're thinking, wow, this is going to really happen. And then we got told to sit again. And then at a certain point, it was like the military came over and they said to us, look, you're not going to be carrying any people. You're to turn around and to go back to Houston, Texas. Some of the bus drivers had to carry the soldiers around to different parts of the city. They led us to believe that this came from the Houston Independent School District, this call to stop us. No, that was a lie, because a week later in the HISD newsletter, it was there in black and white that the reason why we couldn't carry any people back to safety was because the National Guardsmen and FEMA said no. They said we could not do this. We were like from here to I don't know where away from these people as they lay suffering. So yes, they are guilty.
In the end, how many buses was it that went from Houston and that were turned back?
I think it was about 200 buses.
Can you tell me how the press in Houston handled this?
They came there and filmed everybody leaving in this contingent of buses going and like that, but they didn't do near a thing. When we got back, they weren't there.
We were denied any place to stay because all of the hotels, the motels, were reserved for Red Cross and for FEMA. On the way to the airport, I saw all of the unused trailers just sitting there.
And also cruise ships that were, I think, still in the Mississippi River right at New Orleans.
Cruise ship ecstasy and cruise ship sensation.
We're seeing school buses that they're allowed to be flooded before they will allow anybody to take them for to rescue anybody. And we've seen individuals that, after seeing the loss of so many means of transportation, when they commandeered school buses and tried to use them to take members of their neighborhood out, they was either charged, arrested, or they was severely beaten.
The disaster went beyond the hurricane. The disaster then became those organizations, or that particular organization that was put in place to not help.
Could you say who charters the Red Cross?
Our Congress.
So it's a federally chartered.
It is federal, our government.
Call the National Guard before the hurricane hit and the Red Cross, because there are numbers that you can call saying, just in case this is a bad hurricane and we can't get through, this is the address. He's 78 years old, and we left those numbers. My uncle was airlifted the following Sunday. He was in that house 7 days before anybody came back to get him. 3 or 4 weeks after the hurricane, my sister-in-law got a call from the National Guard. And they said, we're calling about a call we received for an Eric Wright. Now this was like 4 weeks, and my sister-in-law said, well, goddamn, he'd be dead by now if you were just, going to get him. Don't worry about it, we got him back.
She was in, Meadowcrest Hospital, which is in Jefferson Parish. At the time that the hurricane hit, we thought that she was evacuated. She was not. She went from Meadowcrest Hospital in Jefferson Parish to the convention center to Interstate 10. to the Louis Armstrong International Airport, to San Antonio, Texas, to other portions of Texas, to other portions of Louisiana. She was never told when she was going to be moved, how she was going to be moved, where she was going to be moved, or why she was going to be moved.
I was waiting for my son. He was due to get out of Orleans Parish Prison 2 days before Katrina hit. But Katrina hit, and he did not get out. But when I did get in touch with my son, which it took a while because they took the prisoners, they put them on a bridge, but during that time, I didn't know where he was at the time because they took the prisoners and they didn't let nobody know where they had taken the prisoners.
In Algiers, we wasn't flooded, but we still had maybe up to 18 bodies that was basically killed by vigilantes that was allowed to fester in the sun. They wouldn't even try to cover them up. They wouldn't even allow or give us body bags. And they only told us that if we took the lime and tried to bury them, that we would be arrested. We seen young black men that were slaughtered because they said they had guns on I-10. But we seen whites, vigilantes, that was able to ride through the communities in pickup trucks with guns exposed, and the police literally just drove by them.
James Reese flew in Israeli paramilitaries by helicopter from Texas, from a firm called Instinctive Shooting International. When I looked on the website of the company, they offer services that will be fulfilled by people who are veterans of the Israeli military forces, and they make a point of emphasizing that some of their men have served in the GSS or the Shin Bet or other Israeli intelligence agencies. And so there were these men from Instinctive Shooting International, Israelis, on the grounds with their M16s slung around their shoulders operating a checkpoint. Blackwater denied, as did the federal government, that there were any private security forces on federal contract, but indeed it turns out, and they were forced to admit it after we did this report, that they were given the first no-bid contract to do security for the federal government. They were given a $400,000 contract to guard FEMA reconstruction sites. When I encountered them in the French Quarter and asked them, what is your function here, they told me that their function was to confront criminals and stop looters. They drove around in unmarked cars. They carried M16s, each one of them, as well as multiple other weapons strapped to their bodies. They had ammo pouches around them. What they've done is they've brought in paramilitary private security forces to back up their agenda. See, it's not just about what's happening right now in New Orleans. It's about what happens when 10,000 black people want to return to their neighborhood. Who are they going to be facing down? The same men who shoot people in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Balkans are now deployed on the streets of an American city by people who have said explicitly, we don't want black or poor people to live here anymore.
The state they wouldn't offer no service unless you was willing to leave.
Because the reality is, there was no Red Cross that I could see when I was there. I saw one FEMA vehicle the entire time that I was there. But I saw every possible form of law enforcement, as they call themselves, every badge, every gun, every camouflage.
It was enough spaces that they could have made sure that everyone was allowed to stay in New Orleans. But what they are looking at, because their estimate is that 30% of the African American voters will not return to New Orleans. And when we lose that 30%, we cease to be a majority in that city. And then that plantation mentality will once again raise its ugly head in the state of Louisiana. And that's what this was all about.
Mr. Rahim, if I may interject here. What I'm hearing here is something that we've never even contemplated, and that is racial cleansing. This is the racial cleansing that is going on here.
We've got the hidden hand, the vicious and hidden hand of the free market, backed up by the iron fist of militarism. We see it in Iraq, and now the Mississippi has become the Tigris. Thank you.
If the forces of nature could have operated, we would have had wetlands to protect us. If the forces of human community could have operated, we could have saved ourselves. And that's what grassroots organization is about. That's what federal bureaucracies are not about. That's what capitalism is not about. That's what our economic and political system are not about right now.
Now, we talk about criminal neglect here. I've done a lot of reporting on Yugoslavia. And I know, because I've been to his trial, that Slobodan Milosevic is on trial in The Hague right now, and he's being held accountable for the actions of private paramilitary forces operating in a part of Yugoslavia that he was not in control of, and he's being held accountable for rapes, for murders, for political killings, for shooting people in the face. He's being held accountable for private paramilitaries. He's being held accountable for a military force that was not under his direct command structure. Michael Brown was directly under George W. Bush. Directly under George W. Bush. The case for criminal neglect is building here. But it's not just about Michael Brown. It's not just about the Department of Homeland Security. It goes all the way to the top. That's what we've been taught. Those of us who report on international justice, we've been taught about command responsibility. How all of a sudden is it inapplicable in this situation? Of course Bush is responsible for the actions of his underlings.